A plane was circling at an altitude of 10 kilometers over Athens. It hadn't communicated with anyone for the past 2 hours. The controller tried contacting it 19 times, but all he got was silence. Things were getting serious. People started to suspect the plane might have been hijacked. Without wasting any time, the Greek Air Force scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets to check on the plane's status. When the jets got close and looked inside through the window, what they saw gave them chills. The captain's seat in the cockpit was empty, and the co-pilot was slumped over in his seat. Everyone else on the plane was either unconscious or maybe even dead. The big question is, how did a routine flight suddenly end up in such a horrific state? Let's dive into the mysterious and tragic story of Helios Flight 522. On the night of August 13, 2005, a Boeing 737 took off from London's Heathrow Airport. This flight, called Olympia, was headed to Larnaca International Airport in Cyprus. The plane was operated by Helios Airways, a budget airline. It was a Cypriot airline that operated flights to different parts of Europe. The flight started off normally, but after a while, the flight crew heard a strange noise coming from near the door. When they checked, they saw a layer of ice had formed all around the door. This was noted down in the technical logbook so engineers could look into it after landing. At 1:25 a.m., the plane landed at Larnaca Airport. The pilot told the ground engineer, Alan Irwin, to check the cabin pressure system. This system helps passengers at high altitudes. Oxygen is necessary to supply. As usual, Alan switched the control from auto to manual mode for the check. During the inspection, no issues were found. Everything was fine. But a big mistake happened. After the check, the control wasn't switched back to auto. A few hours later, the same flight was about to take off again. Fully ready, but with one overlooked mistake: music. Now let's talk about that day when everything was about to change. August 14, 2005. For everyone, it was just a regular day. At 3:15, Flight 522 was scheduled to take off. Approval was granted. This flight was going from Larnaca Airport in Cyprus to Prague, with a stopover in Athens. In the cockpit today were 2 experienced pilots, 59-year-old Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten and 51-year-old First Officer Pampos Haralambos. Together they had over 23,000 hours of flying experience. There were 115 passengers on board, including many small children and families. The crew consisted of 4 cabin attendants and the 2 pilots, all fully prepared for this short morning flight. Everything seemed normal. But behind it all, there were some things hidden that nobody knew about. Nobody probably saw this coming. Actually, the past of these 2 pilots wasn't exactly trustworthy. Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten had been fired from the British airline Jet2.com for repeatedly breaking safety rules and ignoring important protocols. Even so, Helios Airways put him back in the cockpit without any thorough background check. As for First Officer Pampos, he wasn't exactly known for being responsible either. He had a habit of rushing through his work and had even complained several times about Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten's carelessness. The team's start was full of questions. By 5 a.m., the captain, first officer, and the rest of the crew had already arrived at the airport to finish all the pre-takeoff preparations. But that day, some crew members suddenly fell sick, making it hard to complete the flight team. In the end, 2 new flight attendants were called in, Luisa Volterra and Andreas Prodromo. Andreas wasn't initially willing to take duty on this flight. But as soon as he found out his girlfriend, Luisa, was assigned to the same flight, he didn't hesitate and agreed right away. They had no idea that this small decision was about to become the biggest turning point of their lives in just a few hours. As passengers started boarding the plane, both pilots in the cockpit began going through the regular pre-flight checklist. Before every flight, this checklist is a must-do process where every button, switch, and system is carefully checked to ensure the flight is completely safe. But that morning, the flight was running a bit late, and in the rush, the captain and first officer started speeding through the checklist. In that hurry, a huge mistake was made. They didn't notice that the cabin pressurization mode selector was still on manual when it should have been set to auto. At 6:07 in the morning, 10 minutes later than scheduled, Flight 522 took off from Larnaca Airport. The first few minutes were normal. The weather was clear and the plane was climbing steadily. 4 minutes into the flight, ground control cleared the flight to climb to a cruising altitude of 34,000 feet. But that's when the real trouble started. As the plane climbed higher, the air wasn't pressurizing. That meant the air inside was getting thinner, and the oxygen levels were dropping fast. Just 5 minutes into the flight, a strange alarm started ringing in the cockpit. It was the cabin altitude warning alarm, which only goes off when the oxygen level inside drops dangerously low, signaling that masks need to be put on immediately. But the weird part was that this alarm went off while the flight was still at cruising altitude. Hearing that alarm at such a high altitude shocked both pilots. They realized no one knew what was really going wrong. Things started falling apart fast, and there wasn't much time left. The cockpit was in chaos, and the passengers inside the plane were scared. The crew members were trying to calm them down, but you could clearly see the fear on their own faces too. The pilot kept trying to contact air traffic control, but after a few minutes, the plane lost all connection with ATC. Now, ground control had only one option, radio calls, and so the control room tried reaching out over the radio, but all they got back was silence every time. This flight wasn't just any regular flight anymore. It had turned into a mysterious journey with no one knowing where it was headed. The plane was supposed to land at Athens airport at 10:45 in the morning, but by 9:23 it had already reached an altitude of 34,000 feet. At 9:37, the flight entered Athens airspace. Still, no response came from the pilots. Between 10:12 and 10:50, they kept trying to radio in, but the cockpit stayed completely silent. Turns out, both pilots had suffered from hypoxia. They had passed out. It's a dangerous medical condition where the body doesn't get enough oxygen. The first thing that happens is your vision gets blurry. Then your brain slows down and gets confused. Your balance starts to go, and your behavior changes too. Since the captain and first officer didn't put on their oxygen masks even at 15,000 feet, they felt the effects of oxygen shortage really fast. By now the clock showed 10:45, the exact time the plane was supposed to land. But the biggest question was, where had the plane gone? And even scarier was the question, were people on that plane? Were they still alive? When the last contact with Flight 522 happened, 16 minutes had already passed, and by then the plane had entered Athens airspace. After that, for about 40 minutes, not only the ATC but several other planes flying nearby kept trying to reach out to it repeatedly, but every time all they got was silence. Over 30 calls were made on different radio frequencies, but none worked because from the outside, the plane seemed to be flying completely normally. So ground control thought maybe there was some technical trouble with the radio system. But then something happened that made the suspicion even stronger. Flight 52 first started preparing to land like usual. But then suddenly, it turned around and headed back the way it came. That meant the plane had gone into an automatic holding pattern, basically a route the system chooses when a landing is missed. Seeing this, the air traffic controllers on the ground realized something was seriously wrong with the plane, and right then, thousands of feet above, inside that plane, what was happening, we probably never fully understood. But one thing's for sure, there must have been a lot of fear, panic, and helplessness in the air. The cabin crew were seated, holding on to just one hope, that the pilot would start an emergency descent. That is, bring the plane down quickly to save everyone's lives. But sadly, that didn't happen. The crew knew well that oxygen masks only give you a few minutes of breath, and with every passing second, their last hope was slipping away. The officers on the ground had now realized that something had gone very wrong. As soon as, fearing something bad had happened, they quickly sent two fast and powerful F-16 fighter jets to look for Flight 52. Within minutes, the jets reached the plane. One of the jets flew really close to get a good look inside. When the pilot looked carefully, he saw someone was definitely sitting in the co-pilot's seat, but their head was down, like they were unconscious. The captain was slumped in his seat, maybe out cold, or worse. The fighter jet then pulled back a bit and looked through the plane's rear windows. Tried to peek inside, but the sight was absolutely chilling. Not a single person on the plane moved. No one looked out the window, no one waved a hand. It was completely silent. Like everything inside the plane was totally still and frozen. Then, around 11:49, the fighter jet pilot saw a man slowly making his way from the cabin towards the cockpit. The next moment, the man was seen sitting in the pilot's seat. The fighter jet pilot tried to ask him how he was doing with hand signals. It seemed like he wanted to say something, but maybe because of lack of oxygen or he was so exhausted that he couldn't say a word. Just a minute later, at 11:50, the left engine stopped working and the plane tilted to the left and started dropping fast. The guy sitting in the pilot's seat was trying to control the plane, but by then, it was probably too late. Flight 522 was now dangerously close to death. Meanwhile, a faint broken voice came through the cockpit radio, but sadly, the radio was set to the wrong frequency. That guy's last attempt was useless. It was like he was shouting into empty space. Later, when they reached the crash site, when they found the recorder, the world finally realized that the guy kept fighting till the very end. He never gave up hope, but luck just wasn't on his side. Shortly after, his second engine, the right one, also shut down. That man looked one last time towards the 16 fighter jet pilots, slowly raised his hand, and pointed downwards, like he was trying to say there's nothing left now. The plane started plummeting fast. The teams on the ground were clueless about what was happening or what they could do. There was an eerie silence all around. After a while, the plane crashed near Athens. It crashed into the hills of Grammatico, about 40 kilometers away. Just imagine that horrifying moment when the plane hit the mountain. Those 121 innocent people who had no way out, and the fighter jet pilots who saw everything happen right before their eyes but couldn't do anything, no matter how much they wanted to. It was a scene that probably got etched in their minds forever. News of the crash spread like wildfire. Rescue operations started immediately, and the bodies of the victims were pulled out one by one. But when some of the bodies were autopsied, a shocking discovery was made. The truth has come out. Most of the passengers and pilots had already died before the plane crashed. This meant the plane flew for almost 2 hours without any active pilot. Now, the biggest question was, if the real pilots were dead, then who was flying the plane for all that time? The answer lies with the brave man we mentioned at the start of the video, the flight attendant, Andreas Prodromo. Yes, the same Andreas who tried to keep the flight under control until the very end. His broken, shaky voice. They managed to get through to air traffic control, where they called out Mayday, Mayday at least 5 times, desperately asking for help. Andreas had a commercial pilot license from the UK, but he didn't have experience flying big and complex planes like the Boeing 737. Still, he faced the situation head-on and successfully steered the plane away from a densely populated area toward a hilly region. About 15 months later, the Greek government released a report on the crash, revealing that the main and real cause of this terrible accident was just one button, the pressurization. The button that was supposed to be on auto mode was accidentally left on manual. As the plane flew higher into the sky, the oxygen levels inside the cabin started dropping, making passengers feel dizzy. Their heads felt heavy, and breathing became difficult. At the same time, an alarm went off in the cockpit, but the pilot thought it was just a minor technical glitch. In reality, the alarm was warning that the plane was running out of oxygen. Unfortunately, it took too long to realize this. The government called it a human error. That's the truth. The engineers were responsible for not switching this button to auto mode after servicing the plane, and they also didn't inform the pilot about it. If this one button had been set correctly, maybe 121 people would still be alive today. Even after the crash, the airline continued flying for a while. But in November 2006, due to heavy losses, the company had to shut down. In 2007, the families of the deceased passengers filed a lawsuit against Boeing for 738 crore rupees, accusing them of 2 dangerous situations in the cockpit, like lack of oxygen and takeoff issues. The warning alarm was all the same, which was a big technical mistake. Later, the matter was settled out of court. In 2008, a case was filed against 4 officials of Helios Company. In 2012, they were found guilty, and the rest avoided jail by paying fines. Even today, people are very angry about this accident. Many believe that full justice hasn't been served yet. At the place where the plane crashed, a memorial has been built to remember the 121 innocent lives lost because of a small mistake. This is the memorial. It's not just a place, but also a question that still lives in people's hearts today.